Okay, we are live. Welcome, welcome. This is the first time I've ever streamed live on YouTube, so I hope that you are out there existing and watching and there with us and able to see us. Today, we are joined by Dr. Christy Gibson, and she is a trauma specialist and family physician based in Canada. She is the author of the Modern Trauma Toolkit. We're going to talk about that book today. The book has been endorsed by a bunch of medical and mental health professionals, including Gabor Mate, who I'm sure many of you love. I love Gabor, and Stephen Porges. I hope I'm saying his name right. He is the developer of polyvagal theory. And the focus on the book is post-traumatic growth. It's nurture your post-traumatic growth with personalized solutions. Welcome to the show, Christy.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here, Marie. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So do you want to share a little bit about what inspired you, first of all, to write this book? Why trauma? Why do we need a toolkit?
Two really good questions. Trauma has a personal story and a professional story. So I'll start with the professional one. I had been running our residency in health equity for about 6 years. So equity deserving communities. We're talking um, inner city health. Hang on, I'm just gonna clear my throat. We're talking inner city health. We're talking folks who had a lot of adverse childhood experiences that might have led them to choose substance use for dissociation. Folks who were struggling with issues around income support. So folks who were really manifesting the results of traumatic experience. But as a physician, I didn't recognize that. So it was actually another staff member of my community health center who worked in social justice who explained to me the connection between trauma and all of the health and psychological conditions that I was seeing in my clinic. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. So I recognized just how prevalent it was in the community where I was practicing, and like every community I'd been practicing in at that point, and how I kind of felt hopeless about it. I didn't really know what to do. I could then recognize it but not manage it. So I spent a number of years learning many ways to manage trauma. So I became certified in countless therapies. Um, Personally, the story is a little bit different. When I was doing some overseas work, I'd been running an international nonprofit since 2012. And so in 2015, I was caught inadvertently in the earthquakes in Nepal. And I had a lot of stuck trauma responses in my body that I wanted to learn more about because it wasn't something we had studied to a large extent. So I took the deep dive for a couple of reasons.
Thank you. Actually, I'd love to chat a little bit about that experience in Nepal because you have a TEDx talk where you talk about that and how what you were seeing, you had this everyone, including yourself, had this expectation that you could be a help to the people. And it turned out that that wasn't the case. And you also saw organizations flooding in with resources that weren't useful while people didn't have the things that they were asking for. So can you share a little bit more about what you've seen with that, maybe in Nepal and also in your wider experience as a doctor and educator?
Yeah. Trying to think of a way to make this answer short. It's so much about what I believe in is that the community really understands what it needs, and that those of us without lived experience might have other kinds of expertise, but we don't have always that lived experience. So in Nepal, they were anticipating an earthquake, like a major earthquake hits that region once in 80 years, although sadly it's been quite a bit more prevalent since the big one that I was caught in. And so they had a lot of earthquake mechanisms and resources and strategies already designed. So even there were some participants, some physicians from Canada who had helped them design their emergency triage system, but they had it ready. So there was an amazing local response to the earthquake. And I I was working there as a consultant. I was working with them on curriculum and um, really just doing an evaluation. They do an incredible job of medical education at the Patent Academy. This is a particular medical school that's focused on social justice and community work. So we could learn a lot from their processes there. And that was really the essence of the TED Talk was the Patent Academy does amazing work with getting physicians where they're needed in rural areas. The Nepali community had an incredible local, regional expert response to the earthquake. Did they need more resources? Absolutely. But that wasn't something I was available to do. So it was kind of this eye opening moment where a person who is a physician with a lot of letters behind their name isn't all that useful in these kinds of circumstances. And it made me recognize that one of the most powerful things you can do with your privilege and credentials is actually harness the expertise that lies in communities. So even in my book, I have some structures around like, how do you actually do that? What does that look like? So I had run a social innovation lab at my community health center asking people, well, what are the biggest challenges you face and what solutions can you co-design, and I can facilitate that. But because I don't have the same lived experience, it's hard for me to design it.
Mhm. Thank you, Christy. Yeah, when we're talking about healthcare and trauma, one of the things that I've personally experienced, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, is this idea that the doctors know what they're talking about. There's been several times I've gone into the doctor and been quite clear on, pretty sure on what it was, the issue, right? And I communicated to my doctor, and my doctor misdiagnosed
Yeah.
with a different thing. And it actually did turn out to be what I thought it was. And their misdiagnosis and not listening to me and not just investigating and being cautious actually caused damage to my health.
Mm,
So, and I know I'm not the only one who goes
yeah.
through that. So, and you work as an educator with medical teams, correct? Or doctors?
Yeah, not as much anymore, not as actively. So I did a master's in medical education and I have done some small group teaching over the years. I've been heavily involved in the medical school, heavily involved in the residency program, and then not as much recently. So I have projects that I'm a part of, but I'm not in any leadership roles anymore. But it's something I'm really familiar with.
Okay. So what do you personally do as a doctor to kind of check yourself? Because I imagine that can be pretty ingrained in just because of the way that our societal structure is set up.
Um, Gosh, I don't know if it's checking myself so much as trying to approach um, every dilemma and every circumstance with as much curiosity and humility as I can. Um, and it's a hard thing to do because when you're in medical training, um, you have this hidden curriculum that kind of tells you that you failed if you haven't solved the problem and figured out what it is. But I think the expectation on both sides needs to be adjusted in that not all problems can be solved with modern West medicine or even Western medicine. Like it's just not a good paradigm for a lot of things. And so there is an expectation that we are infallible on both sides. And so, like, that curiosity and humility also comes with a large dose of self-compassion. So, I don't know if I'd use the word check myself because it really puts the doctor in the evil seat, and I don't think we are.
Sorry,
Honestly.
I don't want to. I wasn't
Yeah.
meaning to do that.
No, I know you weren't, but the word kind of, like, did something in my body that I was like, "That's not the right way that I would want to hold myself accountable." Like, do we make mistakes that we need to be more apologetic for, more better listeners and like attuning to patients and their own experience of their bodies? Absolutely. But I think there's a really big backlash against medicine right now. And that's one of the reasons why, anti-vaccine, anti-mask has become so prominent, is because people are second guessing our intentions. Like they think we get money from pharmaceutical companies. I mean, that's 30-year-old stuff. It doesn't happen anymore. But there is this wider awareness that physicians are fallible, and we are the first to admit it, but it's hard to admit it to ourselves. So um, I don't think physicians make mistakes intentionally. I think it's part of that hidden curriculum where we're told that we're supposed to know the answers to things that are either unknowable in, the modern context, or where we have had different experience than what the patient's coming with. So we might feel certain about something, um, even though like in your whole mind body system that what it is that's going on. Um, so yeah, it's kind of a long-winded way to say approaching things with more curiosity and humility is always good. I'm still figuring out what that looks like because it's not embedded in our training as much as it should be. And also, I know, 99.9% of the physicians that I know are literally in this to help people. So it's such a shame to me that there's this perception that we do things purposefully that harm, because I know we don't, even though we do cause harm. So can we hold the polarity of both of those things being true at the same time, I guess, is what I'm questioning.
Thanks, Christy. Well, and I like what you said about self-compassion, because, and we'll get to talking about self-compassion and your book, the Modern Trauma Toolkit, because I think that without compassion for yourself, you can't be curious.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah. I think a lot of like physicians who come across as arrogant or they're not good listeners, I honestly think a lot of that's driven from their own fear, their fear of misdiagnosis, their fear of mishandling. And that's where we run into a lot of problems. And I think in addressing my own trauma from practicing in hospital, like the dehumanization of my own body that seemed necessary at the time when I was doing that kind of work. The time that we're kind of held accountable to. So even in hospital with super complex patients that are, at death's door, we would be given these like 20-minute windows to see them. It was not um eh, it wasn't good for both sides, like we would feel rushed and hurried, and the patients feel that too. So I'm trying to do my best to make systems change in new ways, because I tried within the academy and only got so far, but the academies are changing. So I feel a bit hopeful that there's many physicians that are recognizing the problem with the training paradigm and the problem with the relationship. Um, and trying to figure out how to adjust the teaching so that we might do better and feel better ourselves.
Thanks, Christy. I'm wondering, and you don't have to answer this, but I'm just wondering what all of us can do to make the healthcare experience better for all of us, because as you said, it's not only the doctor's responsibility. This is a shared responsibility between all of us.
Well, I think a lot of patients have gone through medical trauma. So the way that you described your experience of having been harmed by a system that didn't listen to you, that's a traumatic experience. And whether it lands as trauma in your body is different for each person. I don't want to make any assumptions, but a lot of people have been through medical trauma. So they have um, an expectation or an assumption about the health system and the way it treats people and about physicians. And I think just that curiosity and humility is important to foster on both sides, because um, even though it can be hard to trust a system that has let you down, and the health system lets all of us down, it's not serving very many of us right now. Um, I think there just needs to be some grace extended around, like, how can I co-create a treatment plan with this person who has expertise on textbook medicine and Western paradigm. And I have expertise on my own lived experience and my past and the things that I've, learned about. So coming together to co-create a treatment plan, I think is like a really nice way to envision the best case scenario.
Thanks, Christy. So you also mentioned we're talking right now about that we're with Dr. Christy Gibson, and she is the author of the Modern Trauma Toolkit, Nurture Your Post-Traumatic Growth with Personalized Solutions. And you mentioned something key about trauma in the body, because I think a lot of us are not sure. We throw this word around traumatic, like, oh, that was so traumatic for me. I'm having a staff meeting was traumatic. I say that on a regular basis. But was it really? What is the difference between, like, this was a stressful situation, this was upsetting, versus this was an actual trauma?
Such a good question. So, and you mentioned Gabor Mate, who endorsed this book as a primer on trauma, like what it is and what to do about it is really the intention of this book. And what trauma is not the experience that you've been through, although you can have an adjective as a traumatic experience. But trauma, as a clinical definition, is the changes that happens in the human system because of that experience. And so you could have three kids grow up in the same family, and each of those three would experience those dynamics in a different way, depending on their individual support, their mindset, their kind of personal nervous system setup and responses to it. So trauma lands in the nervous system. It lands in the brain. It lands in the peripheral nerves. It lands in a reflex response that is triggered from our amygdalas. And it lands differently for each person. And that's good news because it gives us ways to both prevent and manage it. So I address both of those, but prevention is really around the adverse childhood experiences and parenting, also recognizing ancestral and pre-verbal traumas because those get held in the body almost without language. So a lot of folks get told that therapy looks like talking about your problems, which is kind of a hard thing to do if you don't have a story for that problem. If it's something that's in your lineage and it's just in your bones, or if it's something that happened before the age of 3, even during birth, and you, of course, wouldn't have language for it. And even people who've been through traumatic experience, they sometimes might not be able to tell that story because the way that we remember something traumatic and the way that it's stored is more often the associations, because what our brain does is it wants to say, well, let's never go there again. And it stores the context, it stores the emotions, it stores the physical sensations along with the memory. And so the memory itself can be quite choppy, not a regular story. So I think that's, in a kind of the most important things that people don't understand about trauma and helps them both see how all of us have been through traumatic experience and it affects us in different ways. So the pandemic, the climate emergency, these are collective traumatic experiences. Many of us have survived or been adjacent to natural disasters. I mean, they've been raging across Western Canada for the last number of years. It's just been one after the other. And the global south is facing this in an extraordinary way. And then you get down into the community systems where there's racism and sexism and medical ableism, and then the family system. So, like, trauma can happen at so many different levels. And I think that people who grew up with, a safe childhood, they don't really recognize themselves as having been through trauma. And part of what I'm trying to do is to help people have more awareness of, well, you might not have had an abusive situation, but where were your emotional needs neglected? When did you learn to be a people pleaser? When were you conditioned to fawn? A lot of female presenting folks are conditioned in that way socially. So I think just getting this ubiquitous nature of the traumatic experience out there so that people can recognize it in their own systems too. I've lost your volume, Marie.
That's because I had it muted because my neighbor was dragging around garbage cans outside. So
Okay.
thank you for letting me know. Um, Sometimes I notice that people will say they've had a pretty good childhood, but if you ask them specific questions, it's kind of just this fog. They don't actually remember a lot of their childhood, but what
Yeah.
they think is, oh yeah, I had a good childhood because I don't remember bad things happening to me.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there's some hidden trauma, like there was some awful abuse that you've learned to dissociate or distance from, although that is a possibility. I have certainly seen that in the places where I practice, particularly the addiction clinic, because so many people who use drugs are actually trying to dissociate from memories that they want to keep at bay. Um, so there's a lot of different reasons why memory and concentration can be foggy. I mean, COVID is one example. We're seeing dramatic changes in people's cognition if they're having chronic COVID symptoms, um, children and adults. So I certainly would never say that foggy patches of memory are always related to trauma, but it's one of those possibilities. So something worth exploring with your healthcare team, even just um, trying to delineate for yourself what feels like the right story for you. Does it feel like this was a medical reason? Does it feel like there might have been a psychological reason? Um, some people don't recognize bullying as being traumatic, and that's something that can happen every day at school. So if a person learns to dissociate, which is kind of numb out, and in polyvagal theory, we'd call that a freeze or dorsal vagal, and it's really distancing yourself from the pain. And in the present moment, you can still feel like you need to distance yourself from the pain of the past, and those memories can be hard to access. Um, in stage 2 trauma therapy, that's trauma processing, sometimes those memories do come to the surface. I've had some experiences of doing a therapy called accelerated resolution therapy with some patients, and memories will show up that they had been keeping suppressed for a long time. But it wasn't until there was a sense of safety that something could be done about it that the memory showed up in its fullness. So, I mean, I'm a huge fan of therapy. I think all humans should get the chance to experience trauma therapy, which is often really hard to find. We get offered CBT as the only solution to any mental health problem, and I think it's really missing a lot of fantastic tools that are available and effective.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Christy. Yeah, I find in my own experience with working in mental health, um, I think maybe we need to have more education for everybody on trauma, and because we use this trauma informed practice word a lot, and then
Yeah.
I hear the way people talk even just to each other, uh, let alone how they talk to clients, and it's like, okay, I hear you saying that term, but I don't know if you actually know what that means.
Yeah.
So can you share, and I know you do share a little bit about this in Modern Trauma Toolkit, um, what it means to be trauma informed, and is that something that is only for medical professionals, or do we all need to work on that?
Yeah, I firmly believe we need more trauma informed spaces everywhere. So we actually started a small company so far. It's called Safer Spaces Training, and we are working to help workplaces and also self regulating professionals. So, anyone who's in a helping profession, but even people like realtors, lawyers, like anyone who's public facing. Imagine how much trauma a realtor faces. So, think of the reasons why people move. They're getting married or divorced. They're selling a house because there was a death in the family. um, the things that cause the most stress in our nervous systems aren't always just the bad changes. They can also be the good changes. So, having too many kids for the size of your house, but the move itself can be really stressful. And I think, like a person like a realtor wouldn't really understand how much of their nervous system has been impacted by stress and trauma, and how much they might be co-regulating with that stress with their clients. So what we're trying to do is to raise some awareness of how every person who's dealing with the public needs more awareness of their interoceptive signals, which is, what are the things that my body is telling me about my sense of safety or danger? And then in learning about that, then that's how we learn to co-regulate. And part of it is recognizing when the person in front of us is also in a trauma response, and learning subtle things that can be done to help them also regulate. So there's a lot of things that folks can do. I mean, I think every teacher and everyone working with kids should be learning these techniques, especially the toolkit that I've put in this particular book, because so much of it is really easy to learn and really easy to teach. I mean, people teach their 3-4-year-old kids how to do things like havening. So the toolkit, I just realized I didn't answer that first question you had, is the toolkit was really um, a large list of activities, because there's 40 different things to practice in the book that you can really practice on yourself and learn how your nervous system best adjusts. So if we were to take these practices out into the public and say, well, could you learn some skills to regulate your emotions, to recognize when you're caught in that trauma spiral, when your amygdalas are making all your decisions for you? What could you do to recognize when the person in front of you is actually in fight or flight and you think they're angry, but they're actually really afraid of the situation they're in and they're responding in fight? We see this in medical clinics all the time. Somebody will be, verbally abusive to the receptionist, and then we'll kick them out of the practice without recognizing it was a trauma response. Does that make the behavior acceptable? Absolutely not. But at least it helps us know what to do about it. And if we can bring that awareness to the patient as well, that's one of the first steps in recovering from trauma.
Mm. Oh, I'm getting emotional just about this whole subject. Having so many thoughts about what you just said, and about educating children. And I feel like combining that trauma informed approach and that co-regulation with also boundaries, because
Yeah.
if say a receptionist understands and recognizes, okay, this is not about me, this person is having a trauma response, then they can also have boundaries. Like you said, that behavior is not acceptable. But if they're able to say, it sounds like, I'm noticing you're raising your voice, I want to help you, and unfortunately I can't when you speak to me at that volume, right? And then that gives the other person awareness. Oh, I'm behaving in this way, but they want to help me. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that. Like, if we could teach that from kindergarten up,
Yeah.
there would be so many traumas prevented, because we traumatize each other when we
Yeah.
get into those states.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and for those of us in the helping professions, we're kind of taught that we just have to manage our own reactions to these things, like the transference and countertransference, and we have to just deal with it internally, and it can be really hard. So I think some self-compassion around, like, you're a human body. Of course you're going to respond if someone's yelling. So just noticing and an awareness of that. And then can you invoke curiosity and humility to say, well, I'm really curious as to why they feel so stuck in fight and flight that they need to be yelling at a receptionist. I mean, um, yes, boundaries around the behavior, but curiosity around what might have triggered them, or why they are so dysregulated that their sympathetic nervous system just took over and is telling them, you need to fight this problem or run away from it. Um, and I don't think that that's how we tend to approach folks. There's another great book written by Oprah Winfrey and Bruce Perry called What Happened to You. And it's such a great um, way of phrasing it, because so many of us will be quick to say what's wrong with that person instead of what happened to that person. And so the trauma informed approach is to say what happened to them whenever we can. And sometimes we'll be too dysregulated or too reactive, and our amygdalas are firing and telling us we're unsafe, and we can't have that level of curiosity and compassion. But when we can manage our own window of tolerance or window of flexibility and broaden that window, which is something I've really learned to do in the last number of years, then we can co-regulate from our place of calm and connectedness and really get into that question, what happened?
Okay, thank you. You also mentioned a skill or a technique called havening. Just, I'm wondering if anyone watching is asking, what is havening?
Yeah. Well, and it's fun because we're on camera, so I can actually do a quick demo. So, I had never heard of this when I was in medicine, but there is some like pop culture, because some of the Hollywood celebrities have found this to be really beneficial. So, like Justin Bieber, one of the Kardashians, like some of them have actually done articles on it. So it's entering the lexicon. People are starting to talk about it a little bit more. But when I first trained in it, I'd never heard of this. And I was a skeptic, I'll be honest. So the premise of havening is a series of techniques where you would brush different parts of your body really gently, just with your fingertips. So palm of the hand being one of the big ones. And this actually creates delta and theta waves in the brain. So we always have alpha, theta, delta, gamma. Like these are normal brain waves. If we were to measure the electricity coming off the brain, all of these brain waves would be existing in a given person. When you've got predominantly gamma waves, that's a very agitated and restless brain. It's a brain that's really overthinking. It feels like anxiety when your gamma waves are predominant. Delta and theta waves are really slow and calm. They happen when we're in a deep, restful state. So, what's amazing about havening is it decreases the gamma waves and increases the delta and theta waves. So, the first step of it is just really gentle brushing across the palm. And then the other two areas of the body where they found these wave changes happen are the shoulders. So, I would say take the palm of the hand, gently brush down towards the elbow. I'll try to get my elbow on the screen, and then pick the hand up and then do the same brushing again. I think of this as like dogs and cats and horses, cows. Every single mammal loves to be pet. So do humans. So this is a really calming response for us. The last place is across the face. So taking a couple of fingertips and a really gentle brushing motion across the cheekbones, across the eyebrows. This one creates the most of the brainwave changes. So when I teach havening to folks, I'll teach them the physical technique, and then I'll give them an embodied experience where I'll say, I want you to imagine something in the last few days that was irritating. So nothing that was traumatic, but something that just bothered you. Maybe there was somebody who cut you off in traffic. Maybe there was a long line at the grocery store. Maybe your partner didn't put their soup bowl away. Just think of something that was mildly irritating. And we're going to just notice the emotions and physical sensations that come up when you think about that event. And then we do a havening with some guided imagery. Generally, the guided imagery is a multi-sensory experience where you would imagine the smells, the tastes, the textures around you, and you would imagine a repetitive movement. So the rhythm of regulation is really important. Anything you can do on both sides of the body is also very calming. So I would invoke all of those into the experience. We would do havening for maybe 2 or 3 minutes with the guided imagery. And then I would check in with the original memory and say, okay, let's think back to this time that your partner left their dirty soup bowl out, and just notice what shows up in your body, what emotions are associated with it. And more than 9 times out of 10, people will say, oh gosh, I feel really neutral about that now. The same associations aren't showing up. So whatever was stored in the amygdala as being, well, that felt threatening. And so they store the context in the amygdalas to make it feel like something that was uncomfortable. We neutralize it. So you can actually do havening to process trauma. It's not my go-to tool for trauma processing, but it's certainly possible because what you're doing is you're invoking the memory and then you're rewriting the associations to the memory to something calm or neutral. Um, it's amazing.
Thank you so much for walking us through that. And as you were doing this one and saying it's most effective, I'm a little germ phobic, so especially after COVID, so I try not to touch my face. But I was picturing, dogs and cats, that's usually like their favorite place.
Yeah.
You kind of like just rub them there. They love that. So I
And
can see how, yeah.
we're just extra big mammals. So, like a lot of the things that I teach, like tremoring, is something that dogs and horses do too. But I think we've been socially conditioned to not do the things that our body innately knows. So, a lot of the exercises in my book are what does our body already know how to do that we've been socially conditioned to ignore? Or what are the ancient ways that have been brought into modern times? So something like tapping would be one of those. So there's so many skills that are really easy for us to learn that we can better manage the traumatic responses that we have because like when humans were evolving, we were a lot more like the mammals that we co-evolved with. And our biggest dangers were things like predators trying to eat us or natural disasters we had to run away from. But these responses that we still have in our nervous systems don't really work in modern times. Like we can't generally run away from our problems, but our nervous system still tells us that's what we're supposed to do. So we have these kind of archaic reflex responses to trauma. And the more that we bring that into conscious awareness, and the more that we learn the skills to shift our nervous system, the more that we feel we have agency and control over the mind body system. And that's ultimately the goal. It's not to never be mad again or never be scared. That's the human journey. We all feel every emotion. The goal is to feel like it doesn't get overwhelming or it doesn't flip you into a freeze because it's so overwhelming.
Thanks, Christy. And I'm wondering also if with the havening and the touching, if we're starting to have a stress response, a panic attack or something like that, or even if you're in like a job interview or something, maybe under the desk, do you think that would help?
I've taught that exact thing, Marie. Yeah, absolutely. So, like, if you were on your way into a job interview, one way to calm that racing mind might be to do havening. So, there's the havening on the shoulders, and I might suggest to a patient do it on both sides. We call this the moving hug. My teacher, Kate Truitt, is a really fantastic instructor. She's a psychologist who also does research on the nervous system. And this is one of the techniques that she teaches. And it's just such a nice, cozy thing to do for yourself. I mean, I've got this cozy sweater on right now. Like, it feels like I'm drinking hot chocolate just by doing this for my own physical self. I can feel my brain waves changing. But interestingly, when I trained in it, they actually put one of those Muse headbands on our foreheads when we were in the hot seat learning how to do the havening and having the instructor do it for us. So we actually had each of our brain waves projected onto a screen and we could see the changes happening in real time while we were learning the havening techniques. So it wasn't just like an embodied experience that I got. I actually got to see these changes happen in the moment for the other participants. And then someone made a video of my brainwaves, and I was like, this is amazing. So even though this is something that doesn't have a lot of randomized clinical trials, there's great science behind it, and the RCTs are coming. But also, I feel like if you had the opportunity to regulate your emotions and to feel better in your body in a way that couldn't really cause any harm to you, wouldn't we prefer that? So, I'm a doctor. I've been told that there's these pills to help with every condition or most conditions. And I'm just really into learning what else is out there. So, yes, I understand the physiology behind a lot of why people might get anxious, but I'm not going to give people an Ativan or a benzodiazepine that's like addictive and helps them dissociate. It's like giving them 3 bottles of beer. Why would I do that when I could just say, "Hey, couldn't we just learn how to do havening?" So yes, I think these skills should be taught to all children, all public facing people. I mean, just humans need better skills for this, because I think we're seeing more and more social media is a bit of a catalyst and a cauldron for this, but people have really strong emotions that are hard for them to manage. And again, I'm not saying what's wrong with them. I'm saying, wow, what happened to them? And how could we provide the skills that they could learn how to manage it in a way they prefer?
Thank you. And I think in your book you also mentioned, so I know social media causes a lot of harm in a lot of different ways, but there's also some great support and some great education in social media. So we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak.
Yeah. Um, it's so funny, Marie. I never in a million years would have dreamed this was part of my life, but I joined TikTok almost 3 years ago now. So in January will have been 3 years. At the suggestion of a young person in my life, Ashwarya. She's, almost like a daughter to me. She's one of my favorite humans. And she said, the way that you explain mental health in the academy, we call this knowledge translation, but it's basically helping people understand challenging concepts. And she said the way that you do it is really different. I've never heard anyone explain mental health in the way you do it. You should really get on TikTok and help people understand this. And so I started making 1 minute videos, was all we had back then. And by June, I want to say I had 60,000 followers. So now I have over 130,000. So obviously the channel really blew up, and I think a lot of it is because people are really hoping for more skills around mental health, self-awareness, and skills like tools. Um, and they're recognizing that this is really prevalent, but many people don't have access to a therapist, or they don't really believe in the paradigm of therapy that's easily available out there. So like I said at the beginning, for most folks, CBT is the only thing that's available. And for many people who've been through trauma, it's my opinion that that might not be the best choice to open the doorway into the 3 phases of treatment. CBT, I think, can be really helpful in the final stage, but it's not necessarily the best in the first and second, in my experience and understanding. So people don't always have good access to the therapy that might be useful for them, especially somatic or body-based therapies. So I've mentioned a few of the ones that I teach in the book, which is havening, tapping, and tremoring. These are super easy things to teach people, but most clinicians don't have this understanding. And if people can learn their own regulation, then they would feel a lot more empowered, that they wouldn't feel so hopeless and so um, agitated about the problems that they do face. So that was really what I wanted, was knowledge translation, both through TikTok and then writing this book. Both of them, my intention is to use words that are really easy to understand, to use accessible and inclusive language, and kind of cultural humility around that as well. Because, knowing that I'm a white woman, uh, cis woman of a certain age, like I can't presume to understand the experience of the global majority. And I wanted to show up with that understanding with a lot of humility too. So part of what I try to do in social media is teach, but also lots of learning.
Thank you. Yeah, I bet you learn a lot from, and that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about your book as well, is throughout you're kind of like inviting, if this doesn't work for you, let me know. So because you're always wanting to learn, and maybe I'll ask now. So you're on TikTok. What's the best way for people to connect directly with you other than purchasing the Modern Trauma Toolkit?
Um, well, I'll just say quickly that I don't take patients. So the places where I work is with our local refugee clinic and in our local adult addictions clinic, and I take referrals from the doctors there. So I don't work in the broader public system, and I certainly don't do the private system. So that's one thing I'll say to start, because a lot of people will send me an email saying, "Hey, can you help?" And I would love to, but that's why I thought, well, if I join TikTok and if I write a book, then I can reach a few more people. So On social media, I'm TikTok Trauma Doc there. A lot of my other social media, I'm Gibtrotter MD. On Facebook, I'm just Christine Gibson MD. I use my fuller name there. And my website is christinegibson.net. The website for the book, I would really encourage people to look at it because it's just the sweetest website I've ever seen. I'm so indebted to Christina, the illustrator from Mexico, who created the characters that are both in the book and on the website. But it has such a soft and lovely feeling, but also really diverse representation. So on one of the pages on my website, your cursor actually turns into a butterfly. Like, I'm obsessed. So that's moderntrauma.com is the website. All the purchasing options are at the top banner, but every local bookstore should be able to order it if they don't already stock it. It was a big five publisher. Like, I didn't self-publish this because people actually saw my TikToks and thought, hey, like your approach to this is really different than the existing people talking about trauma. I don't do it in a very academic way. I do it in a way that's really simple language. And then I have that systems perspective. So a lot of people talk about trauma and they have one solution, but I have this idea that everyone can create their own toolkit. And some of those toolkit will be for the individual, some will be for the family or community, and then some people will be really wanting to make systems change. So I wanted to address all of the levels of change that are possible.
Thanks so much, Christy. And there's something I made a note here: post-traumatic growth versus resilience. I really liked the way you compared the two, or kind of defined it, because we hear this, oh, you're so resilient, you've been through so much. And it's like we praise people for the crap that they've survived, which on the one hand, like, yes, they've survived this, but to kind of make it a badge of honor puts even more pressure of like, it's just sometimes the weight that people carry is just so much, and it's invalidating to tell them how resilient they are.
Yeah. Well, you really nailed it, Marie. That's exactly it. I think resilience is something that typically people are forced into. They were either in a family system or a structural system that harmed them, and they were forced into resilience. So while it's amazing that they survived, I really love the idea of post traumatic growth as the goal. And that's like, from gamer language, I would call that leveling up. So in the book, the illustration that Christina helped me with was you're floating along in life and things are okay. And then you encounter this traumatic event or this challenge, and you feel like you sunk underwater. So you're no longer floating. You're kind of scrabbling to get to the surface. Some days you can barely breathe. It's a lot of effort and it's scary. Resilience would be finding something that floats or getting thrown a life preserver and managing to float again. So feeling like you can handle things, you can breathe again, but the struggle is still there. It wouldn't take a lot to kind of sink you again. So a lot of my folks would ascribe the feeling of stress to feeling like they're underwater. And post-traumatic growth is learning how to swim. And people learn how to swim in different ways, which is why I always call this a personalized toolkit. But learning how to swim might be um, the backstroke or breaststroke or freestyle or just dog paddling. And all of that is okay. So what post-traumatic growth looks like for different people, it's an awareness of your own physicality, so how your nervous system responds to stress and tension. Many people go through their whole lives without having that awareness and that ability to notice. So a lot of this comes from the Buddhist practice. So self-compassion obviously has that same lineage, but it's that ability to be in the moment, but also be the observer, observing yourself in that moment. The more that we have that capacity, the more that we don't take things as personally, get dysregulated as quickly, the more that we can see the bigger picture and not just our role in the situation, but all of the roles. So all of these things are capacities that can happen once you've been through trauma and come out the other side. And they don't necessarily happen without a person having to figure it out. So, a lot of the folks that I work with, I'll say, of course, you would never choose these things to have happened to you, but what are the opportunities that it opens for us to learn because of what it felt like to be underwater? And you know what that feels like. So, what's your capacity for empathy to understand the suffering of other people? What's your capacity for self compassion? Instead of saying, gosh, what's wrong with me? Or I'm not good enough, to say, oh, I'm really curious where this not good enough feeling is coming from, and who might have given that to me in my lineage, and how can I work to understand that that doesn't belong to me, and it's not serving me. So this awareness is something that I think it can be such a gift for a lot of people, and it's certainly what I strive for in that third phase of trauma management.
Oh, thank you so much, Christy. And I see Sylvia from New York was the first person to comment on our first live stream. So thank you for that. I don't know if Sylvia is still here, but hello. We are speaking with Dr. Christy Gibson. She's the author of the Modern Trauma Toolkit, Nurture Your Post-Traumatic Growth with Personalized Solutions. And there was something about, I had written down something about boundaries. Where did I write it? Boundaries and trauma, and I don't see it here. So I guess maybe I just noted it in my mind. Can I ask you though, what is, oh, hi Sylvia, she is listening. So what's your favorite tool in the toolkit? You said there's 40 tools.
It's hard to pick a favorite. I've been asked that question a few times, and it's like picking your favorite child. It's different based on the situation. So I'll say my most famous TikTok is a strategy called affirmations, and I love talking about this. So this is a cognitive thing because you have to be able to think through it. A lot of people have heard of affirmations. So affirmations would be something like saying, "I am good enough," or "I deserve good things to happen." And when you've been through trauma, those can be kind of hard to ascribe to because your brain is trying to tell you the exact opposite. So for some people, affirmations are great. So again, this is about personalizing your toolkit. But affirmations are tiptoeing your way towards that po- possibility. So the opposite of trauma isn't feeling good all the time. The opposite of trauma is mental flexibility. So when we think about that flexibility, it's imagining that other ways of thinking, other ways of behaving are possible. And an affirmation would ask, what if I could believe that I'm good enough? What if there is a time in the future where I could imagine myself believing that I deserve good things? Or even, what if I deserve care? So, those what ifs in front of an affirmation can sometimes take that edge off of it where it feels like you might be gaslighting yourself with the affirmation. And gaslighting yourself means like you're saying something that isn't true and it doesn't feel true. So, sometimes for people, affirmations feel like gaslighting, and an affirmation feels like, well, yeah, I guess that could be true. And it just allows you to move towards it. And it plants those seeds of possibility. So rather than your go to brain reflex saying, well, you're not good enough, your affirmation is going to say, what if you might be? What if you might be good enough? And we're just planting the seed, see what grows.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so we learned havening as a somatic technique. I love tremoring as a somatic technique. It's something that I'm flabbergasted that the human body can do, and that we don't channel it. We don't learn this. It's called TRE, or tension releasing exercise. Um, and it's just like the way a dog or a horse would shake their little bodies to recover from stress. Humans can allow a subconscious tremor starting in our core and our psoas muscles, and then it travels through the body. It's not something like, it's not me just moving my hand. It's actually my body shaking and releasing the tension and stress that it hangs on to. I was so amazed when I learned that the human body did this. So I'm just hoping that people can learn both cognitive or brain based and somatic or body based skills, because there are so many out there that most of us hadn't heard of. Like, it took me 8 years going down rabbit holes to learn the skills that are in this book. And to be honest, I've got 2 more planned. So I'm hoping that I get to write more.
Yay. Well, I want to be mindful of your time because we've been speaking for an hour here. And thank you so much for your time, Dr. Christy Gibson, author of the Modern Trauma Toolkit. I feel like that information really, I felt like an expansion in my chest, because it's just like, well, what if I am worthy? Like, that's just feels so
Yeah.
much more. Yes. What would you like to close us with? What's something that maybe I haven't asked you about that you really want to share?
You've asked some fantastic questions. So I think we've covered most of the topics that I would have loved to broach or talk about. I think probably just reinforcing to people that their stress reactions are normal and protective. So rather than thinking that I can't get off the couch, I'm stuck in freeze, I'm not doing my to-do list, I just feel so overwhelmed by everything, or you're stuck in this restless, agitated fight and flight energy, rather than feeling shame about that, I really want people to understand that this is your brain body's way of protecting you. It's giving you these patterns of nervous system response in order to protect against threats. So rather than thinking of all of this fight, flight, and freeze as being something that's a problem, think of it more as a solution or an adaptive response or a survival strategy. And that's the first step, which is self compassion. And once you have that, it gives you more likelihood that you'll pick the book up and say, well, now what can I do about it? So recognizing that there's actually nothing wrong with you. This is the way that you were designed.
Thank you so much. But yeah, it's part of our human experience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Christine and Christy. I'm going to, after this is over, I will post your socials in the description if that allows me. Again, this is our first time trying this, so we'll see what
Yeah.
happens.
Well,
But
I'm
thank
happy
you
to be your
so
guinea pig.
much. Yeah. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. And thank you
Thank you, Marie.
to people who are watching. Take care.
Thanks.